Steve, what Utah's been a part of games at home when they were a part of the Pac-12 and elsewhere, but because of last year, what is the level of expectation and maybe even excitement to try to see if Utah can put this ship back where everyone thought it would be even last year?
Yeah, I think, when it comes to talking about expectations around Utah, I think there's been a lot of cautious optimism with this program and, how they look in 2025 because of, exactly what happened last year and even the year before. I think there's been a lot of, trauma, I guess, when it comes to, what is Utah going to be? And I think what's been really interesting so far through 3 games is, with the change at coordinator and the change at quarterback, I think that's really been a much needed change, right? A turning of the page from the last era under Cam Rising and some of the headliners of that Pac-12 back-to-back title winning team. I think Devin Dampier has been a breath of fresh air, not only in terms of how he interacts with the media, but also in terms of his presence within the locker room. I think last year took its toll on players and coaches. And I think it's just been a complete reset. So obviously with Texas Tech coming into Salt Lake City this weekend, this is sort of the big test. This is the marquee game in the Big 12, and there's a lot of excitement for this matchup because it's a top 20 showdown, and Texas Tech has certainly impressed through the first 3 weeks, and I think there's a lot of curiosity around how legitimate is this Utah team, and even Texas Tech. I'm sure they're asking the same questions, given the schedule that they've competed against through the opening part of the season. So this is a big one, not only for Utah fans, but Texas Tech fans, I'm sure as well. And I think there's just a lot of excitement for watching these two teams, duke it out on Saturday morning.
Do you think this will be a shootout, or do you think the defenses will control the tempo of this game?
I actually think this will be kind of I don't want to say a shootout, but I also don't think it's going to be ugly. I think this is going to be a game that ends up, around the 30s. So I think there's going to be moments where, you see some explosive plays. You see some defensive grinded out type of moments as well. So, I think it's going to be, really, really competitive. I think it's going to have people on the edge of their seat. And I think it's going to come down to a handful of plays being the difference in this one. So I think I sort of, like I said, I see this game, the final score ending up in the 30s. But I think it's going to come down to, a couple of key elements. And I think obviously with Utah, when you talk about this team, it's the ground game and that offensive line that's generating a lot of push up front and creating a lot of open yardage and open field for the run game. And then with Texas Tech, they've been as balanced and as explosive as you could possibly want on offense. And I think that's going to be a challenge for Utah, is limiting that explosiveness and sort of turning this into more of who's going to be the most efficient with their opportunities. So that's sort of how I see this game. I think it's going to be pretty balanced and really, really competitive.
So obviously Devin Dampier's off to a nice start. How would you sort of review what you've seen thus far? And I guess my bigger picture question for the Utah offense is the O-line's clearly great. The quarterback looks pretty good. What do you think about everything surrounding that?
Yeah, I've been really impressed with Devin Dampier. I spent a lot of time this offseason watching film from New Mexico, and specifically the matchups against Power 5 conference teams. And, they played Arizona, Auburn, and Washington State, who, had John Mateer and Wayshawn Parker actually, and were ranked 18th at the time. And, in watching Dampier, the thing that always stood out to me was just how he was able to keep the offense on the field, sustain drives. The accuracy, it was, there were some erratic misses pretty frequently. And so his accuracy as a passer was a little worrisome, but also too, I thought that the offense was geared more towards the downfield, passing game, the vertical passing game, which wasn't necessarily a strength of that New Mexico team. So, with what we've seen so far is through 3 games is we've seen, good decision making, protecting the football. He has 7 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. We've seen good accuracy for him because he's not taking a lot of those shots down the field that he was last year. And I think that's what you're seeing is just a player that's really benefited from having time in the pocket, having options, in the passing game to get the ball to, and he's made good decisions. And so I think that's really allowed him to maximize his ability. And I, to this point, I think he is going to have to evolve as a passer as the season goes on. But I think there's enough here. Utah's established enough in the passing game that you feel good about Dampier being able to be productive and provide balance to this offensive attack.
So what's it like to have a quarterback that week in and week out, hopefully he stays healthy, that is going to be there and also produce after the last couple of 2.5 years or so?
Yeah, obviously, knock on wood whenever you're talking about injuries with Utah. But I think it's such a key factor for Kyle Whittingham teams. Kyle has done a tremendous job of building up this program from ground level. When he made the move, when he led Utah into the Pac-12, it was a significant shift in terms of the talent needed across the board for Utah. And fortunately for the Utes, they call home, Salt Lake City, and there's a lot of a strong presence of Polynesian bodies, and those are big bodies. And Utah was fortunate enough to build from the trenches out. And it wasn't until the last few years of the last decade where Utah was able to finally start adding the key pieces at those skill positions, with that quarterback spot being the final piece, right? With Tyler Huntley being the guy to break through, and then Cam Rising taking the reins and finally getting Utah to a power level conference championship back-to-back years. That's been the key. And so for Utah this season, obviously the last 2 years have been marred by quarterback injury situations. Having Dampier on the field is so huge because Whittingham has built this team, from the trenches out. They've got talent. They've got pieces in place. It's just been that quarterback position the last 2 years that have really limited Utah's ability to contend and also to compete. So to have Devin Dampier and with the way that he plays ball, I think it really suits well, in Kyle Whittingham's brand of football that he likes, the identity that he's built, and the culture that he wants to embody at Utah.
What do you think is the biggest key for the Utah offense to get going this week?
Just continue to do what they've done, and that's, establish the run. For Devin Dampier and that option attack, it's been really effective. And for Utah, that offensive line is they've invested a lot into that offensive line over the last few years. And this is kind of I don't want to say the culmination, but this is when you're starting to peak, right? When you've got a Spencer Fano and Caleb Lomu, 2 guys that are now being projected as first-round draft picks. That's crazy to say. You have 2 offensive tackles that are projected first-round draft picks. It's going to be on the offensive line to establish things and sort of set the tone in this matchup. Now, on the defensive side of the ball, this is going to be, a big test for this defense. They haven't faced an offense as potent, as dangerous, and as efficient as Texas Tech is. They've got all the answers. And so this is going to be a test for the defense. But in terms of the offense, it's just going to be about establishing the run game and then seeing what that creates. So for me, that's what it boils down to, is Utah continuing to lean on their identity, that being the ground and pound game.
So you had the note, I guess it was yesterday evening, about the receiver who's hurt, and it's not like they have much depth at that position. How much does that set them back?
Not much. Adrian Zipper was like wide receiver 5 in that room anyway. So, the guys that we've seen so far, these are the guys that, Utah is going to be counting on. Zipper would have been, nice to have in that room. He was a guy that flashed some potential last year. He only caught a handful of passes, but Utah is going to evolve over the course of the season. And Kyle Whittingham has always been a proponent of playing your best football in the month of November. So, though we haven't seen the passing game click on all cylinders just yet, that's going to be the progress in terms of week in, week out. What sort of new elements have we seen in the passing game? But it's going to continue to be Tobias Merriweather. It's going to be Larry Simmons, Ryan Davis. It's going to be the tight end room, which is, again, proven to be a really good room this year with Dallin Bentley and Hunter Andrews. And so that's going to be the key is just continuing to evolve over time. And I think with Jason Beck, he has a really good feel for what this group is. And because of the experience he has with Dampier from last season, he knows what he can do to maximize Dampier's potential as a passer as well.
Steve, when the announcement, what Utah, Colorado, and Arizona schools were going to be a part of the Big 12, out of all those fan bases, I think Utah fans probably were the ones kicking, screaming, and pissed more than anybody else. And we've seen some of the quotes, the Utah AD, among others. And then they went through humble pie last year. How much did that eat them up? And do they still have that edge, or are they still wanting to see another win or two before they kind of get back to what they were?
Yeah, I think this year is all about, getting back to where they were, not even the year before, but those 21 and 22 seasons when they got to the Pac-12 championship. That's where the focus is with this program, is getting back to a championship level status. They're not concerned, in terms of, the big picture. Kyle Whittingham has always talked about it in the past, but we've asked him questions about sort of the big picture stuff, which he's always been willing to share his opinion on. But he's been a lot more guarded with that. And I think there is a focus in terms of, keeping the focus on the field this year. And I'm not saying that was a distraction last year, but I'm just saying that Utah's focus is entirely on getting back to playing championship level football. And they feel they've got a team that's going to help that. That's going to, they've got the pieces in place that they go out week in, week out, compete against these Big 12 programs. And, they feel confident that they're going to have an opportunity at a win each and every week. And that's sort of the mindset that they brought into the season. And, they're focused on getting back to a conference title game.
All right. Eccles Stadium, right? Rice-Eccles Stadium. Explain for anyone who hasn't been there what it's like, what makes it so special.
Yeah, it is a special place, and it's grown in reputation over the last few years. Florida was a program that had never traveled west of the Mississippi River. They went to a bowl game that season, but that next year, in terms of on a schedule, not a bowl game, that was the first game that the Florida Gators have ever traveled west to. And that was a significant opportunity for Utah. And I think surprised even the Florida Gators program, which, in the SEC, they're playing in big stadiums each and every week. And so it's a stadium where you've got the Musk in the south end zone. You've got the north end zone, which is just a tremendous group of fans that are loud. And so they just recently finished the south end zone to close it off. And since then, I think that was the 2021 season that they finished the south end zone renovation project. That stadium, the raucous environment and the chaos that it can create has been really, really impressive. And I think it's a stadium where the fans are right on top of you. Obviously, Utah fans, the tailgate scene in Utah is something that I think not a lot of people, they sort of dismiss it because it's Utah, right? We all know Utah's, the reputation that Utah, the state, has when it comes to alcohol and that sort of stuff. But I think the tailgate scene at Utah is tremendous and it's welcoming and friendly. And, obviously there's a lot of healthy banter, when other opposing fan bases come walking through the tailgate lot. But Utah fans are always willing to chat it up and share a beer with one another and have a good time. And I think that's the thing that, as these other fan bases start to come to Salt Lake City, travel to Utah is, this is just a really proud fan base. They love Utah football, and yet they are respecters of who you are as a fan. And getting to interact with fans, from other fan bases, something that Utah fans always enjoy and love and embrace. And so it's not Provo where they're complimenting you and saying nice things about you during the game. There's certainly a lot of trash talk, but I think at the end of the day, Utah fans are always welcoming, friendly, and willing to share a beer with you.
Steve, enjoy the game and covering it. Thank you very much for your time. Steve Bartle, KSL Sports, with us